over its body other than the face itself.
There are, in fact, 4 different types of, what we think of as Sasquatch or Bigfoot.
Very wide, pronounced nose. There was also a very ominous odor.
Phase 1 is to identify opportunities. I walked into a small clearing in less than 10-15 feet away from this enormous creature, and it scared the living hell out of me. Phase 2 is conducting investigations both of witnesses and locations. The size of the thing, it was 4 or 5 feet across the shoulders. Phase 3 is profiling research areas, what's there, how they move, feeding, things like that. About 8 feet tall, I guessed around 800 pounds. It was massive. I had no idea that anything like that existed. Phase 4 is create an intercept plan. I decided to shoot in the air to see if maybe it would scare it off. Phase 5 is the intercept and resolve the issue phase. It didn't do anything, didn't react, and then I heard a noise from my right rear, and from out behind some brush come another one, walked over by the first one. That's when I decided to do what the dog did. I took off running. Welcome to Witness of the Unknown. Hello everyone. Welcome to the weekly chat that Brian and I have. Brian and I have been talking about doing a few different things occasionally, and one of the things we're going to do is we're bringing a listener. We're going to start with one, and then we'll kind of see how it goes. But this evening we have Adam with us. Adam is one of the persons that send in questions that Brian and I have kind of kicked around a little bit, but not a lot of his questions. Fellas, how you doing tonight?
Doing good, but I'm feeling the pressure, because if my interview goes bad, that's it. No more listeners.
Well, actually, you're on the questioning end of the stick. I'm in the hot seat, so.
Oh, well, yeah, that's true.
Brian, how's it going, buddy?
Oh, not too bad.
Well, I'll let you guys. I don't know who wants to begin, but we'll just jump right in.
Brian, you wanna get the ball rolling?
Well, sure. We did. I don't know if you listened to last week's show, but we did.
I did.
Okay. We had a couple of yours. I guess we can come back to. We didn't get to all of them though, but I guess Will, just reading your book again. There's one point where you talk about rock piling and rock stacking. And there are some accounts of that happening. What do you make of that? Is that just another way of marking territory, do you think?
Well, I first saw it in one of John Green's books, back in 1975 when I first found out there were these kind of books written on the subject. And it was kind of a footnote almost. And in fact, later he actually removed that particular story. And it wasn't much of a story. It was from a logger in northern Oregon in 1967. And just quickly, I don't want to go through the whole story, but quickly, this guy was, helping another logger and equipment operator work, and he didn't have to do anything this particular morning for a while, so he went walking around, he saw these 3 creatures, and they were stacking and piling rocks. All Green mentioned in his book, and he showed kind of a profile shot of his son standing in a hole, and all you could see was head and shoulders above the rocks, and you couldn't really see a hole or anything. It was kind of an unusual thing, but it sort of stuck in the back of my mind. I always thought, why would they do something like that? And then years later, Rene DeHinden came up from California on one of his trips, and he called me, like he always did, and he said, hey, let's meet for breakfast tomorrow morning. I'm going to be over at such and such place. And a friend and I went there, and we decided to go for a drive with Rene, and I asked him along the way, I said, Renee, what about the rock stacks that are in Green's books? He says, oh, you want to see those? I said, sure, I'd like to see them. We're in the neighborhood. So he kind of pointed the direction, told us how to find them, and he went on another direction. He had to visit somebody else and head back to Canada. So we didn't get there in time for because it was getting dark, so we decided to come back up the next day. And this particular place has been seen by a lot of people. It's fairly close to a road, so nothing too unusual except the rock stacks and the hole are still there, or at least they were still there. And I called Renee. He told me, he said, after you take a look, call me. We talked about it, and I went to visit him, and he told me how to find other sites like that. And he put me on to either 7 or 9, I can't remember off the top of my head. I know of about a dozen plus sites up and down the coast like this. Now, they're all extremely remote, very remote. You're not just going to go out walking around and finding them. You have to know how to find these places, and they're very difficult to get to. So I went to Renee's again and talked to him, and he says neither one of us could really figure out what the purpose was. So we just sort of shelved the whole thing. And this past year, I was talking with a friend of mine who's a forensic anthropologist, and he's always bugging me about finding some form of tool use with these things. And I had to kind of think outside the box a little bit, when it comes to tool use, not something you just grab in your hand and do something with. What constitutes a tool? Well, tools are anything you can use in the environment to manipulate, other things to get a result. So I was looking at a hunting blog one time, and they were talking about these rock piles, natural rock piles, attracting a lot of rodents. And I got a hold of my anthropologist friend, and I said, well, what if they did this? Would that constitute tool use? And he says, absolutely would. So currently that's kind of my thinking, is that's what they're doing. They're, sort of supplementing. When they're coming through an area, they've got these things in place. They come through an area, and it's just a kind of a supplement to their diets.
Oh, that is interesting.
But it would constitute a form of tool use also.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely, it's a trap. Yeah. Wow.
Adam, do you want to? We left off, I think, with you were asking about. I don't know if we got to this one yet, but are there any accounts of sightings of infant Sasquatch? Will, I know that you had. Didn't you have a footprint or a cast of one a couple years ago of an infant?
I do have one. I do have one in my collection. A friend of mine in Washington. We were emailing back and forth and talked on the phone a few times, and he said, well, I found these tracks, and they were standalone tracks in some mud on the backside of a lake, and there were adult Sasquatch tracks not too far away. They were 15-inch tracks. This little track is maybe 3 inches long. It's tiny. And I've had other people send me photographs of infant tracks. So, yeah, there's actually quite a few of them.
I just wondered if anyone had ever witnessed, I mean, it's rare enough to see a Sasquatch. Yeah, I wondered if anyone had ever actually, seen in your interviews, because I've heard some crazy things, but I don't put any stock there. I want to circle back to the crazy things, by the way, but I just wondered if any of the people in your, witness collection, if any of those guys had ever seen an infant.
Yeah, I've heard people say they have.
Okay, good deal.
I mean, it's rare, but they have seen them.
Yeah, Will, just to also kind of answer that as well, I've read an account here in Florida, actually, in Lake County. There is a state park, I forget the name of it, but there was a very horrifying account of a guy who was driving through this place, and it was kind of soft. The road was soft mud almost, and his truck got stuck, and he was there. He was stuck, and he had a experience with one of these, and obviously it must have been the mother Sasquatch, because he said that, well, first of all, he was terrified, and he kind of waited it out. The Sasquatch didn't attack him in his truck or anything, but it threw mud at his truck. And he said that when it was leaving, when it finally left, it went back into the woods briefly and picked up its infant and was carrying it around a hip, just like a human would, and crossed the road and went into the woods and never saw it. So there have been cases like that, or encounters like that, where people have reported infants.
That'd be a bit of an underwear changing moment, wouldn't it? Good thing it was throwing mud. Good thing it was throwing mud instead of something else like other primates do.
Yeah. We been to the LA Zoo. I've had to dodge things from time to time.
Yeah.
It's like they got the signs up now that say no eye contact. Apparently that's what they get all excited about.
And that's interesting, because that's something Native Americans say with the Sasquatch is when you encounter one, don't look them in the eye.
I think that Native Americans got crap hurled at them at one point from
or something. I'm not sure, but it sort of fits in with other large primates. That kind of behavior.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Hey, while we're down in Florida and in the South, the falcon monster is one of my obsessions, and there were the three-toed tracks that were found in Willie Smith's bean field, and I've read Lyle Blackburn's book on the subject, and he's got 2 of them now, and he had said that there was a little suspicion at the time that Willie Smith may have made those prints himself.
Well, I'll tell you something about the three-toed prints, and I know somebody who was actually involved in the filming of that and everything. That was a misconception. They were actually 5-toed prints.
Okay.
But somehow it got put into the film as 3-toed prints when it actually wasn't.
Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Well, we know Charles Pierce took liberties,
Yeah, I used to have to kind of scratch my head and think 3 toes. I mean, now, let me put a little side note with that. There have been 3-toed prints found on occasion, but that's due to, not enough large breeding populations, so you get a little inbreeding, and it causes things like that.
Okay.
But it's rare.
I was also thinking that it might be even just an injury, because you've got snapping turtles, you've got no shortage of alligators, you've got all these, I could see somebody losing a toe,
Yeah, and it's interesting too. We have from Bossburg, Washington, in the early 70s, the cripplefoot prints, but that's not the only tracks that have been crippled like that. I've seen a number of them where there were deformities on feet. So, yeah, absolutely, there should be some deformities occasionally.
Makes a lot of sense. Definitely does. I have a kind of a Mr. Black-ish question. You're gonna laugh. You're gonna laugh. Has he mentioned or broached the subject of the government having any live specimens, or ever having had any live specimens in captivity at any point?
I don't know about live specimens. He does know one of the scientists who dissected 2 of them at least that he knew of.
Oh.
As far as live ones, I'd have to ask him. I'm not sure at the moment.
I mean, there's that account in Ivan Sanderson's book of a Yeti that was captured and held for, I guess, 4 or 5 days. I believe the Russians had it, and it was on location. It was there in the Himalayas, and it just basically became, according to that account, it became unresponsive after so many days, and they I guess it either got loose or they let it go or something like that. But it looked like it wasn't going to make it in captivity.
Yeah, I remember that, and even the story of Jacko, from 1882 in British Columbia. That one, they captured it, which was interesting. People listening might recall one of the guys climbed above it and dropped a rock on its head and knocked it out. There's some high-tech capture methods there, but they had it in captivity, and they actually put it on a boat, and they were going to take it to Europe to display it, and it died along the way. And they didn't know in those days, of course, anything dead, you throw it overboard because of disease and all that. But
Wow.
I don't think it was. It was a young one, so it might have been a little more responsive than an adult would have been.
Fascinating. I never heard part two of that story. I always, that story always ran out of gas when, it was in the jail, and then that's the last I heard of it.
Yeah, they were going to take it to Europe and tour apparently with it, and it died along the voyage.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's amazing. So no live specimens.
Oh. Okay. No, not that we know of or we're told anyway.
Okay.
Hey, Will, Adam was also asking about the, have you ever heard of the occult or the occult Screamer investigation? Do you have any of those recordings?
I've got some tape somewhere. A lot of my stuff from Yakult, unfortunately, was destroyed in a basement flood. Some of the stuff I have floating around, I have to dig it out. I need to get another player. There were so many screams that went on. And I've got some of my friends who were there. I'll have to contact them and see if they still have any of the recordings. But there was stuff almost nightly that went on there.
Oh, that's amazing. How far away were do you think the Sasquatch were that were making all the racket?
When they were screaming, it was probably, a wild guess would have to be up to a quarter of a mile away or so. It was loud.
Wow.
Now, when they got closer to where we were, where the people were, they wouldn't vocalize. We'd hear them run and do things like that, but they wouldn't vocalize once they got down into the valley.
Wow.
But they would vocalize up on the mountain and come down vocalizing.
Fascinating. I mean, do you think that in some way sort of it's like they're announcing their presence, but then they don't want you to know exactly where they are? I'm guessing. I don't know.
There was so much that went on. I mean, it was really hard to make sense of it sometimes because, sometimes they'd be noisy like that. Other times they'd be dead silent and they'd be right there near us. One evening we went there, a group of us, and we split into two parties. Now, we would never at night go outside the boundaries of the yard. They had a fence around the yard where the grass was mowed. Then it was hay fields. At night, we wouldn't go beyond the fence. And because that kind of goes back to my anthropology training, if you're going to observe, a primate in the wild, you don't intrude on their area. And that was sort of their territory at night. And they would come close there. The German Shepherd was with the group I was with. There was maybe 4 or 5 of us in a group. We were kind of walking and listening in the yard. And the dog was acting very peculiar. His head was down, and it wasn't making any noise, but he was very intently watching this fence line.
Wow.
And we sort of walked around that way slowly, and as we got towards the paved road in front of the house, and it was very brushy around there. So, I mean, it was almost like a tunnel, this little paved road, very little used road. Something burst through the brush along the road. I mean, not more than 30 or 40 feet in front of us. And you could hear it running away from us on the blacktop. You could hear bare skin slapping as it would go slap, 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 slap as it was running away from us. And we just stood there in shock. And it was obvious what it was.
Yeah. Holy cow. It's a good thing it was running away.
Yeah, that's what we thought too.
That is intense. Oh my goodness. Well, the house slapping, and I wonder if it doesn't connect somehow to the screaming when they come down the mountain, but I'm wondering if because they're sending a message,
I think they're challenging. Because when you're encroaching on a home like that, it's all about territory. And and there are methods that we employ when people ask me how to get rid of them. And one of the things is, of course, you have to take your territory back, which is your home and, whatever immediate area you don't want them in. So I think that's part of it, is a challenge.
Makes sense. Yeah, I was wondering about that because it's come up again and again in these stories,
It happens pretty often.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, even your recent Witness of the Unknown interviews, that's come up, I don't know, 3 or 4 times, lately. So,
Yeah.
wow. Very impressive.
Hey, Will, I was going to ask you too, because you talk about it briefly in your book, but do you have any more background, or do you know any more about the supposed 40 mummified giants in Mammoth Cave, Kentucky?
Not off the top of my head. There's some of these things, I use them for references, and I can't remember that one, the particular reference, what that was relating to offhand. I wrote the book 10 years ago, so...
Yeah. Well,
actually, a little more than 10 years ago. Now, I started writing it in 2001, so...
Well, no, but it's actually a good point, though, too, because there are lots of, not necessarily mummified giants in a cave, like in this case, but there are so many different, perhaps, bones and skeletons that might be mistaken for humans when in fact they might be they might be large humans, and in fact you don't know if they're really humans or not.
And that happened in the book I put in there some examples. Where, and it was in the chapter about demonstrating by decade things that are going on, and there were people who wrote letters to I guess I can't remember if it was a doctor or who it was, got a letter from somebody asking about some of the, these giant bones they found of a human, and wanted to know if they were interested. So I think a lot of times they were misidentified.
Right. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of with Neanderthal man, right? That's pretty much type 4 Sasquatch. So science has them, but they haven't. As far as what it looks like to me, science.
What's interesting about the fossil record too, with anthropology and the human line or hominid line, and I guess they use hominin now instead of hominid. I don't keep up with some of those terms, but they talk with authority like they know how these pieces all fit together, and in reality, that's not the case at all. They don't really understand a lot of those things. They're guessing when they put a lot of it together.
Yeah, it's a dynamic, it's kind of evolving. So
it makes you wonder, what are the real ancestors they've got bones of or fossils of? Are they ancestors of us or these things?
Exactly.
How would they know?
Exactly.
And Will, on that note too, there's a good section in the book too where you interview somebody, some scientist, I forget his name offhand, but you interview somebody about the process of how they get DNA, and how, like, for example, if they find hair, it's not as simple as, oh, you found some hair and they're going to be able to just identify it as Sasquatch, right? It's going to come back as they're going to put it into their database, and if it doesn't match anything, then it's just going to be closely related to a primate or something like that.
And they used to drive me crazy. It still kind of does when people start. But back when I was working on the book initially, this was one of the things that was going around at the time. Everybody was, oohing and ahhing DNA. Like you could just grab some sample and plug it into a system and bingo, you got the answer. And that particular scientist... There was an article. There were some people who had a Sasquatch sighting in, I think it was northern British Columbia. And they went where they saw the creature go into the brush and supposedly took some hair off a tree. Now, on a side note on that one, if these things are designed like they should be designed, they've got an undercoating of hair with guard hair. Now, the guard hair, these things... That hair doesn't come off that easy. It doesn't just snag on trees. Otherwise, they'd lose their hair. They'd be bald walking around the woods. Just like other animals, deer and other animals have a similar situation. They don't leave a lot of hair all over the place. So, anyway, they took the hair. They sent it to this facility where this gentleman worked, and I think it came back something else. It wasn't a primate hair. It was some other. Either some other animal or it was synthetic. I want to say it was synthetic fibers. But anyway, I found his how to contact him, and I said, look, I'm writing this book about Bigfoot. I don't want to talk Bigfoot. I said, people have a huge misunderstanding about DNA and how that works. I said, can we talk? I would like to interview you to educate readers about DNA. And he perked right up and he says, absolutely, well, let's talk about DNA. And essentially, unless you have something now, we can do it with humans because we've studied the heck out of ourselves. In the DNA, database, we're probably the 98% of what's in there.
Gotcha.
And other people, they study other things, and there's a percentage of that. But for an unknown, and I know an agency that actually had a blood sample, and it was taken by law enforcement. It was handled through the proper channels. In other words, there was no contamination. It was handled properly. There was a chain of custody, and they did the wrong test. They did the full spectrum analysis, and the best it could come up with was unknown primate. So when these people out there claim that they've collected all these samples and they did all this stuff and it came back Sasquatch, that's complete crap.
Gotcha. My gosh. Well, obviously, Mr. Black and the folks doing the autopsies, these guys are quite obvious, I would suspect, quietly DNA profiling the Sasquatches, so the people who do have those answers aren't talking. That's what my money's on. I would bet.
I won't say, but I would say yes.
Well, it just kind of makes sense, I mean,
Sure.
and I was thinking about it today. It's like, the policy of silence and whatnot, and or no comment, or which is sort of the same thing with UFOs and other, et cetera, But I'm thinking when it comes down to Sasquatch, it's like, I'm kind of grateful for it in a way, because if that wasn't happening, it would pretty much, it wouldn't have the mystique, it wouldn't have the allure, it would be,
That's
might
true.
be like. It'd be like seeing a grizzly bear, which I've never seen in the wild, never want to.
Exactly. I don't either.
It's a terrifying thought, but the notion of a grizzly bear is in my head as it's not mysterious. It's big and dangerous, but it's not mysterious. Whereas, Sasquatch, because there's the mystery, it has this attraction to it. Mm-hmm. And also me being traumatized in second grade by the Legend of Boggy Creek, that's a big part of the attraction too, quite frankly. It's so funny because I've never seen one, and I don't want to see one, but at the same time I'm very hungry to get footage of one, just because I feel like it's already happened, but once again I suspect the powers that be have said, nah, that footage is a little too good, and so the phone gets wiped or what have you, that's
Sure.
a suspicion. I don't know, but it's a suspicion.
Mm-hmm.
It's so in a way, I'm kind of glad that they've got their policy of silence,
Oh yeah. I think that's, from what I know, it's actually a necessity at this point.
I can imagine. I mean, I guess we can't really discuss it too much more. We'll pull the curtain back too far.
Yeah, I don't want to cause them any more problems than they already have. So
sure,
let's move on to another subject.
Yeah, moving on.
Well, I think a lot of people do want to see them. They just want to see them from their safety of their car as they're driving by. They don't want to be out in the woods alone with them.
I always laugh about that. I've had 2 encounters with these things in my 46 years. And the first one was the underwear changing moment that nobody wants to have. The second one was, like, I call it the Goldilocks encounter. That's the one everybody wants to have. The first one was the up close and personal one where I almost crapped myself. And and that's the one that happens more often than the other one. The other one, we were driving along the river going up to a place we'd been finding tracks in the snow. And I come around a bend along the river, and there's this thing across the river. So we're in the car across the river, and this thing is over there, and it quickly heads off into the brush. So that's the one everybody wants, but it doesn't happen that much.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Unfortunately.
my friend Jose, he told me about he had just a super quick sighting, and he was on the train going through it was either Northern Cal, Oregon, or Washington. I think he was on the Starlight Express going north. I don't have the details. I can get from him. However, he was just looking out the window watching the woods go by, and the train went onto a bridge. And so you could see down into this beautiful forested gorge. There was a creek running down at the bottom of it. And there was a Sasquatch down at the bottom of the creek, a black one. Mm-hmm. And he said it was like he was thunderstruck. It that crazy trauma that hits just out of the blue.
Oh yeah.
It happened to him, and then the train just kept going, of course, and that thing was out of sight. But he told me, he said that thing was enormous, and because it was way down in a gorge. And he's inside the safety of the train, for crying out loud, just looking out a window, and he felt that anxiety, that panic, and I was like, holy cow! I was very impressed. And I tell you what, before he told me that, I had been very prejudiced against the whole Bigfoot existing situation, and I'd read a book called The Making of Bigfoot, which was an attack on the Patterson footage. And I thought, well, maybe that's true because it's been so long. I figured by now we would have had, miles and miles of film and video footage on these guys, And so I started going, well, I don't think it's really happening. And then and I mentioned that to Jose, and he told me his account, and I said, well, I'll be damned.
That's usually how it is. If somebody's really against it, and then they have somebody close to them or somebody that they believe, that if it's a very credible person, say that, yes, I saw one. What do you say then? You're not going to call somebody like that a liar, that is very truthful.
It will. That actually segues into one of the questions I was going to ask, because I know, in fact, I was going to ask that very same thing about how hard is it to convince some of your the new friends that you meet, or even your family members? Because I know that one of your sisters kind of made fun of you when you came up with the experience, and then she later on in her life had an experience of her own.
Yeah, we talked about that not long ago. She when we first found those tracks in 1972, we were kids. I was 14. She was 2 years younger than me, so she kind of raked us over the coals pretty good. She's a pretty sharp wit, even at that age. And it was enough to where, and my parents were laughing and everybody, so we just kind of didn't talk about it after that. And it was years later. Well, she had her sighting, close-up sighting. She'd come around she made a left turn through this intersection not far from where we grew up, and it's pretty remote area. There was nothing out there. A street light and it was an old house that they'd made into a little family store, and the store was closed. And she made this left turn through the intersection, and under the streetlight, here's this thing right there, not more than 5 feet away from the car, and it's kind of jumping up and down, agitated. Scared the hell out of her, and it was years after that before she could work up the courage to tell me, and she wouldn't say it in front of my brother-in-law.
Wow.
It was one of those moments, as a sibling, I could have said, "Told you so."
Yeah.
but I didn't. I understood because I'd seen these things. I knew what she was going through.
Right. Well, you can hear it in Sean's voice. When you did that first interview with Sean from Nebraska,
right.
You could hear how distressed he was.
Oh yeah.
And I heard him on Sasquatch Notes from the Field a few days ago, where he's talking to Jeremiah and all those guys, and now he's relaxed and comfortable talking about it. And it's but it was really something to hear.
I've talked to people who were right on the verge of tears, reliving the fear of what they encountered. And it's really therapeutic for people. I mean, if you've had a traumatic experience like that, to talk to people who have had an experience themselves. And I hate the example using Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's kind of like that. Not really a support group, but where I've heard people who are alcoholics say, you can't understand unless you've been one yourself. And,
Gotcha.
And it's kind of the same with this subject. If you haven't encountered one of these things, you can't relate to it unless you talk to somebody else that has also.
That makes perfect sense.
Will, what would you say percentage-wise, the amount of witnesses you talk to, or the percentage of witnesses that you talk to, don't tell their immediate family or friends out of fear of, whatever, fear of ridicule, and it's just years later that they finally tell their story? What percentage?
I would say at least 75%.
Wow.
And a lot of them who've talked to me have had to really work up the nerve to contact me, and it's only because, I had my own experiences with these things.
Right.
Wow.
And oftentimes, I'll talk to people and maybe they don't want to record an interview. A lot of them don't. They just want to correspond and sort of, bounce things off me and, get a response or even just an acknowledgement that somebody else saw something similar to what they saw. So, it's a high percentage. I mean, when I say 75%, that's at least that much.
Wow. Well, it makes sense, though. I mean, I talked to my father, and he lives in Arkansas, kind of in the mountains, further north. He's away. He's in anywhere near those swamps. But hey, they got a range of 500 miles, right?
Oh, easily, yeah.
They could go up there and ski or whatever they want to do. But I asked him about it, and his attitude was like, kind of like, oh, I'm not going to worry about that. This kind of attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and he was being nice, so I just wondered if, and he lives in a house that's, off the main road. There's trees everywhere. And he does mow his lawn. So he's got a riding lawnmower, and he keeps the grass, away from the place. He's got good visibility around his house. But he's not going through anything. He hasn't heard anything. There's nothing going on. But, I feel like that area is probably, it's not a place that they're currently active. It's probably a place they've at least been through. It's just sort of, it's a woodsy mountain, in a very low populated state. I mean, I would expect that'd be a place they wanted to be,
Oh yeah, and it all depends on the available food supply.
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, he told me he's got tons of deer out there.
Well, there it is.
Well, and flipping that over, that makes me feel good about hiking in the Angeles Forest, because I rarely see a deer, and I feel like, and I know we've had in the 70s, there was a lot of activity out here, and I know Claudia saw one in Big Bear,
mm-hmm.
and her kids saw its children. Actually, it's the younger ones, if I remember, back in 2017. So that's recent enough. So I guess they're around, but they're I've never, and when I go up there, I'm always up there alone, and I'm staying on the trails, and I'm being a good hiker and behaving myself and whatnot, and not getting myself lost. I'm not going bushwhacking or doing anything nuts, but I'm looking. I got my eyes open to see if there's anywhere that a print might be or anything like that, and I've never seen anything.
I never realized there was anything like the Angeles Mountains until the Sci-Fi Channel flew me down there and then drove me out there to do an interview with Joe Rogan. I got out there. I thought, oh yeah, okay, I could see a few of them being around this area.
Well, there were around. Well, I tell you, okay. Across from Charlton Flat, there is an observatory, and the mountain that it's on, as it goes up, is called Devil's Peak. And not too far from there is a gorge called the Devil's Punch Bowl. And you know how these things don't get the name devil because, nice
Right.
people.
And long before the term Bigfoot or Sasquatch was coined,
Yes.
the common terms for these things were mountain devils, creek devils, things like that.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I've been up to Devil's Peak, but I couldn't get to the top. The trail, in 2009, the station fire burned its way through the Angeles Forest, and a few of my favorite spots didn't get hit, but that area did, and so it has grown back. It's been about 10 years, and it's grown back, but they didn't restore the trail that went up there. It's just covered in brambles and thick brush and everything. I'm sure these guys would have no trouble getting through it, but I can't get through it.
Right. Well, it's good for them, I guess.
That's right. Yeah, if they're still there, I don't know, but I don't see the deer density there. I was coming out of the Silver Moccasin Trail around sunset, heading back to my car, and I saw just 2 deer just came moseying down the creek, and then kind of up the side and were gone. It was only 2. I feel like, and my son is he's very big into the outdoors, and he was a camp counselor at Camp Josepho, which is in the Santa Monica Mountains, and he was telling me that there's only 13 cougars in the entire Santa Monica mountain range, and it's illegal to hunt deer here, because basically they're saving them for the mountain lions.
Oh, true, right.
for the 13 mountain lions.
Wow.
I don't know. We may have lost a few since he told me that. I don't know.
Hey, Will, Adam was also asking, too, we didn't get to this question, but about the samurai chatter. You've heard those audio tapes before, right? With the
right.
samurai What do you make of those? Because Adam was wondering if they're actually language that they're speaking amongst themselves, or are they just trying to imitate perhaps Native American words or things like that? Or
I'm really on the fence on that particular. Now, I've heard these things make chattering noises and stuff. It doesn't sound, what I've heard doesn't sound like what's on those recordings. So I'm kind of on the fence about that because it's never been recorded elsewhere that I'm aware of. So maybe it has. I haven't heard it anywhere. But and to me, it almost sounds like a human voice making those sounds. But it could be legit. I don't know. Now, as far as them chattering and stuff, I doubt that it's a language per se. Now people will gripe about that and cite specifics or whatever. But when you look at, let's say, chimps, we use chimps for an example. They all kind of make the same range of noises. But now language would imply kind of the same meanings from one group to another. They could all communicate using the same noises, but that's not really true. It's group specific, the meanings behind those noises. Right. Language, I mean, it is communication, obviously. I don't know what level language would be considered. It probably is some rudimentary form, but not the human. And that's right. What people, it drives me crazy that we always try to do blanket labeling of things.
Right.
And that does not apply really to anything. This blanket labeling, you have to kind of look at, in specifics what's going on, with the different species and how they're using those things and all that.
Right. And when you say group specific chatter, you're mainly talking about like family units, right?
Probably. I mean, with the Sasquatch here, and same with chimps, if there's a band or a group of chimps, right. They understand what certain vocals mean, certain things that they're doing. If they were to, do that to a group, an individual or group outside of theirs, they wouldn't understand the context.
Right, and I think that also goes too, perhaps, with banging sticks or banging, trees.
Right.
Because maybe that is specific to one group that knows what that means. Maybe it's a sign that there's a deer around and now it's time to hunt. Or
sure.
But for another group, it might mean absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and I actually saw a video on YouTube. There was they were looking at chimps hunting, and I think it was the leader of the group, the alpha. And it was interesting, kind of hopped up on its hands and it slapped the tree with one of its feet. And that was the signal. And then the rest of this group, I think there were around 20 of them, kind of fell into line and they all knew their places during the hunt, what to do.
Right.
Wow. So that was their cue.
But that was their cue. But it would be something different with another group.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Fascinating. When the question in the Samurai Chatter, and it was because, like you said, it's really only on that one recording. I've heard a few accounts where people mentioned they heard it too, but just a handful, you know.
Yeah, I haven't heard too many. I've heard people say, "Oh yeah, that's what I heard." Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know. Without personally investigating it or hearing the sounds, I mean, you have to compare them.
Gotcha. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, you know, and in the Sierra sounds in that recording, the guys making the recording are kind of hooting back to whoever's on the other side of the creek from them, and it's almost like if yeah, talk about messing up your own experiment. You know what I mean? It's right. Like, you know, if those were Sasquatches over there, then they've contaminated by, and maybe the Samurai Chatter is the Sasquatch parroting back what he hears these people saying. And it's a one-time thing.
And the problem with that is, see, these things, just like other wild primates, are extremely wary of things that don't belong in their environment. Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons. I mean, aside from, I'm speaking of things like trail cams and such, if it doesn't belong in their environment, they're going to notice it right away, and they're going to, you know, make a wide swath around it to stay away from it. So if people are in the area, now, number one, they view us as a predator. We're dangerous, especially if there's more than one of us. And they go out of their way to avoid people, except during certain circumstances, and it might involve food or what have you. But typically, if there's a situation like that, and if you're trying to make noises towards them, they would probably bail instead of doing something back.
Gotcha.
Because if they're making noises, it's between each other. It's not back and forth towards humans. Right.
Yeah. Harry and the Hendersons may have got that a little bit wrong, I guess.
I would say, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, man. Well, I'd be very interested to hear your take on the whole siege at Honobia incident that happened a few years ago in Oklahoma.
It was interesting, but I think talking with a few of the insiders, now Mr. Black isn't the only insider I deal with, there's a few others, and I've got a few different perspectives from those coming from these people. Now they tell me that there was a lot of embellishment with that.
Okay, got it.
So, you know, having, you know, talked to Mike during the interview was very interesting. There were some things that, you know, I was kind of scratching the back of my head about throughout that talk. But, you know, when I interview somebody, I let them talk.
Yeah.
You know, express what they're saying.
Sure.
But that's what I was told, you know, through my inside sources. There were quite a few embellishments.
Okay.
Now, I don't think Mike is lying about the encounters. I just think from what I was told, there were things added in that didn't happen.
Okay. Gotcha. I mean, the BFRO hunter sleeping in his truck while everything was going nuts.
Yeah, I that was true. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I was told the guy was 72 years old, and I mean, it was just kind of a fiasco.
The man needed to sleep, for crying out loud. It's like, if those Sasquatch want to get shot, they're going to have to do it in broad daylight like everybody else. You know?
Yeah, I tell you what, if I were in a situation described that way, sleeping would be the last thing on my mind. I can guarantee you that.
No kidding. Yeah. Well, I know. Well, that one's one of the scariest contemporary accounts, and when you're saying it's been embellished, I feel a little bit better about it. But
yeah, unfortunately, there have been a few accounts out there that were fabricated. Okay. Not that particular one, but there were some other ones that have been promoted widely that were actually fake. I won't go into that.
Okay. All right. Gotcha.
Brian knows what I mean.
Okay. You guys read each other's minds for a second there.
Well, we've discussed it off the air, so.
Gotcha. Oh my goodness.
Hey, Will, I have a question about the Dogman, because I know that we've talked about before how it might be a certain type, But I actually have something to maybe ask you about that beyond that. Do you think that perhaps too, that because you mentioned inbreeding before and about the three-toed foot, do you think that that might have something to do with the dogman appearance, perhaps, with some of these people, these eyewitnesses?
I think it's possible.
Genetic
I know Mr. Black told me. Now he told me specifically there was a species of wolf that they discovered, very rare but very large, and he said oftentimes they will stand up, not like a biped, but under certain circumstances. But he did say very much, and he wanted to stress it because it kind of drove him crazy too. All this stuff that. It's usually misidentification or people who are prone to believing something like that, and they might see something like the Type 3 Sasquatch that resembles that, and bang, that's where their brain goes. It was a dogman.
Yeah.
Well, you had that one witness who said that he saw that his brain said that looks like a werewolf. Remember that?
Right.
The guy,
right.
the anonymous veteran, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he said, "I hate werewolves."
Well, there's certain places. I know a big hunting guide in Wisconsin, and he was telling me a few years back that people in Wisconsin are absolutely infatuated with werewolves.
Oh my God.
In fact, on Halloween, it's like big business, for costume makers. And I looked on YouTube. In fact, there's some pretty doggone good werewolf heads, these prosthetics, and they're affordable. So I have to wonder. In fact, I have someone actually looking for hoaxers who have done this to interview. But I think that happens a lot more than people realize too. It's been done with Bigfoot, and there was one guy actually shot and killed wearing a ghillie suit, trying to mess with people.
Well, you would know this too, probably, because I think this happened in Washington State. But wasn't there somebody several years ago who was wearing a Bigfoot suit on a road and got hit on a highway or something, and got hit by a car and died?
I believe it was, yeah. So I mean, it's just, now I do pranks when I camp. I've mentioned before that me and a few of my buddies, it was after the Blair Witch Project came out. And we were up camping, and of course, being a smart aleck, we had, because it was wet in Washington, we tarp everything up so we'd stay nice and dry. And when we take everything down, we use this cheap twine to tarp everything up. And we were cutting it off and throwing it in the fire, and I get the bright idea. I see these tree limbs, so I make this thing and I hang it up. And my buddy Scott comes over and he just busts up laughing because he knows exactly what it resembles. And there's even a picture of me and my brother-in-law and my friend Scott, and he's got this thing, the legs of it over his head. but he looks at me and he says, "You're a bastard." He says, "The next people come in here are going to wig out thinking this is some kind of a, this sight from like the movie." And I said that was the whole point,
Start looking for the bodies.
So there are people that joke around and do stuff like that. So I have to wonder how many people have seen something and it was in reality somebody pulling a fast one.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
well,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Brian. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say, Will, going back to one of your first witnesses from the show, Witness of the Unknown, I remember the guy, he said that the place that he was at was so far away, like he had to drive 40 minutes one way, another hour another way, and then go on a helicopter to a location.
Right.
And it's like for anybody to fake like a hoax.
Oh,
yeah. He drove 2 hours. This is in northern Canada. He worked for a gas and oil exploration company at the time. Yeah. One of the best sets of tracks I've ever seen. Beautiful, because they were fresh and they were in the right kind of material. Yeah. But he had to drive 2+ hours to get to the helipad. They flew another 62 kilometers to the work area. So there was nobody up there except this handful of people that were running this equipment.
Right. Yeah, so my point is that a lot of these a lot of the hoaxes that might take place with people wearing a werewolf costume or a hat or something like that. Location is always key. If you know that there's a lot of people out there who might be out there trying to hoax or play jokes on people, that's always a good indication, or a good red flag, if you will.
I've never had any real interest in the whole dogman thing.
Yeah.
Of course, I run it across my sources, and they get a good chuckle out of it because they know what the reality is. So I just sort of backed away. But I would expect that if you really looked at where the areas where these things were occurring, there's probably a common thread in there somewhere.
Yeah. Well, and something, when the Type 3 Sasquatch runs on all fours, I mean, I naturally, I think someone would look at that and think that's the monster from The Howling or something. I mean,
absolutely, and a lot of these things move on all fours, periodically. So, and I think when you look back at what people used to call, shapeshifters or whatever in history, and especially where the whole idea of the werewolf came up, and I think I talked about this in my book. And Brian was talking about my first book, Notes from the Field. When you look at the origin of some of those things, what was, and especially when they say werewolf or man animal, well, its outward appearance kind of generally fits the parameters of a man, because they stand up on two legs like we do and have all the same appendages, but they're hairy and look like an animal.
Yeah.
And especially since wolves had a really big impact on people throughout history until modern times, that would be the first conclusion. It's a werewolf. Well, it's a Sasquatch. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, it's a species. Yeah, it's its own thing, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it makes perfect sense, though, and it helps shine some light on an area that superstition and folklore and tradition, have kind of kept in this mystical category, when it looks like the basis of it, it's a Sasquatch. Yeah.
And I think people just want to believe a lot of things, and you can't convince people who are firmly convinced that the dog man is real. They will dig in their heels. And, if anybody out there is listening that, is of that belief, you're more than welcome to your beliefs, obviously. But I don't subscribe to that particular notion.
Well, it's their job to research the heck out of the dog man and, bring the evidence for it. You know what I mean? And get the footage. Get the damn footage,
Yeah, people hear, a witness talking about something and bam, it's truth. Well, you need to dig these things out, ferret through the information and find out if there is anything supporting it.
Well, and footprints, right? Let's get some dogman footprints. What do those look like?
See, now that's the thing with Sasquatches. We have footprints going back hundreds of years, probably thousands of years, but photographs of them for a long time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and they're very consistent across geography and time.
Yep. Yep. No, it's impressive. When I went back and I think I looked at the Peter Byrne photos going through the snow, and you see that straight line, it's like it's not like the human tracks side by side. It's like that,
And I don't know if I showed you, Adam, or not. I've got some recent pictures in the snow of a line of prints, but if I didn't, I'll send them to you to have a look at.
Oh, I do have that. Yes. No, I have that. That's great stuff. It's really neat.
Brian,
Thank you.
Brian, I sent you those prints, didn't I?
Yeah, and the thing about those two, the reason why they're pretty much verifiable is the fact that the prints are there, and if anybody were to they're very, very long steps, first of all, but second, and they're all in the straight line, and then secondly, to think about if anybody were to make those up or to fake those, where were their tracks,
And you can see quite a bit of space around those prints. They go across the highway for people listening. This line of tracks, and there's probably maybe I'm guessing a dozen or so prints that go from one side of the road across the road to the other, and presumably into a tree line. I think it actually shows that in one of the pictures. But the snow's not very thick, maybe quarter to a half an inch thick, and so the prints, the foot landed in a spot. it moved off, and the snow actually melted there, so you got this perfect outline, and you can see around the line of tracks for quite a distance in both directions. Absolutely pristine snow. There's no marking whatsoever except this line of tracks, and then there's quite a bit of space between the prints.
Right. Yeah, those are really fascinating photographs. Oh my God. Yeah, that's compelling. That's good stuff.
Yeah. Brian, anything you want to bring up before we're getting a little short of time?
Yeah.
We got a few minutes yet, but
yeah. Before I forget, one question that came in from Dave. I know you've covered this before, but I guess if you could cover it again. He asks, ask Will, how has his field research changed from 30 years ago until today's day and age?
Oh boy.
And so I guess he's not just talking about research and witness and interviewing witnesses, I guess, but also like field work. How is your field work?
My field work. In the beginning, we had no idea what we were doing. And to be quite honest, I don't think the original pioneers knew that much about what they were doing. Because having gone out with them, it was more of a, go to an area where there's activity and you do a lot of snooping around. And that was a lot of it in the early years. You go to an area and conduct searches and see what there is, if anything. But as I have, collected information and done some observations with places like Yakult, and it's really been in the last few years with the contacts I've made that I don't just go to places and look around. Some places are interesting. I have hunches about them. In fact, where those tracks in the snow came from, I've had hunches about that area for a long time. And then the pictures sort of bear it out, my hunches, or hunches on that. But with the knowledge I currently have is something that no one has except people, the folks we're not talking about have, because it came from those sources. I know very specifically where to look for these things and what things to look for.
Right. And one thing I would add to that, too, and not that you didn't do it before, but I imagine 30 years ago, you would just look for evidence, pretty much, just to find evidence. But now, as the years have gone by, especially today, you don't just look at evidence, but you look at the context in which the evidence appears. And you're not just looking at like physical evidence, but also behavioral evidence. Like, what were they doing? Were they protecting a young one? Like the Goldhammer.
Actually, that was sort of my starting point. Now, I watched, like I've mentioned Green and all those kind of guys, what they were doing and the things that they would say, because I would present things from talking to witnesses to them, and they would, like we talked earlier about, knowing someone who has a great deal of credibility when they say something that they saw. And I would run those kind of things from those sorts of people by those guys, and sometimes they would just dismiss whatever it was this person said. And I knew better. I knew that person was absolutely telling the truth about what they saw. So I started questioning in the back of my mind, do these guys know as much as I think they know? and the answer was eventually no. So I started splitting off from them and keeping my own counsel. I wasn't that I would just dismiss what they said, but they were very rigid in their thinking about these creatures. So I knew there was more to it, and one of my interests was behavior. They never talked about why these things were doing something. And when I would question witnesses about and listen to the behavior of the creature, it would lead me to finding more evidence than what, like the Yakult thing. I mentioned that before, when there were probably 3 or 4 different groups of people that went there before I got there. And the first thing, they all looked for the same thing. They wanted to collect the story. They looked for footprints. They looked for hair. They looked for poop. That was it. Then they packed up their bags and off they went, never to talk to the people again. So I listened to the story. And the behavior was very curious, because when young Nick ran out there, he slipped and fell. The creature turned around, and it acted surprised. And it kind of looked at him like it was trying to figure out what he was. and it put its hands out, its arms out at a 45-degree angle from its body, both arms, palms facing him, hands open, and it started coming towards him like it was herding him away.
Yeah.
And then when he ran back and changed his boots, he had some pretty poor boots on, he said, he went running back out there again. Well, this time it didn't do that. It come barreling after him. It was chasing him. It didn't catch him. Didn't try to catch him. Now, obviously, it could have caught him. But it chased him back up. He climbed up on an outbuilding, and it stood there for a while, watching him like it was making sure he wasn't going anyplace. Then it resumed its route, the very same path, the very same direction. And I said, did any of these people that were here, and one of them was even a biologist, he claimed, from Seattle. I said, did anybody go bother going down there where this thing went? Nah, nobody was interested. I said, can I go down there? Sure, we'll take you down there. So off we go through the fields. Along the tree line, we get up across this little creek, little tiny intermittent creek. Started going up into this other pasture, and we're talking probably 5 acres or so away. There was a downed, I can't think of the tree, cottonwood tree. Big cottonwood tree. It was probably, 3 feet thick or so, big root wad. Wind had knocked it over. And under the base of the tree, now the root wad, if you picture the looking sideways at the root wad standing up in the tree going from left to right, under the base of the tree, on the tree side, not the root wad, was a kind of a dried up pond that just fills up in the wintertime. And it was just dirt. It was the only place there was dirt. The rest was field grass. And here were 2 sets of footprints all over in this dirt in this little hidden cubby hole. And I said, that's why this thing was trying to keep people away from there. There were 2 young ones that were hidden in this spot. So you learn things. And I told people there, I said, now, there's probably a female here, too. So we know there's, by the appearance, I guessed it was a young adult male. There were 2 young ones, and I said, there's probably a female. About a month after that, the family called me. I was in bed around 11:30 at night, and they called me, and they said, Will, you got to get out here. We're looking at this female. And they described it. It was watching him under the outside light they had by the barn. And I got there, and sure enough, there were 16-inch tracks, fresh tracks right in the flower bed. So you learn things by listening to behaviors of things.
Yeah. Got it. Very cool.
Well, anything else, fellas, before we wrap up? We're just about out of time.
I got a quick question.
Okay.
I am madly in love with your Witness of the Unknown book, Volume 1. And I'm on the edge of my seat for the announcement of Volume 2. I'm really hoping...
Oh, Volume 2 has been published.
Oh, my gosh.
I'm actually kind of putting stuff together for Volume 3.
Whoa, so I can get 2 and 3. Here we go.
Right.
Excellent. Because that's just such a wonderful collection. It just really is. And I tell you what is great is because at the end of the last account is the military account,
Mm-hmm.
and I had heard on YouTube one of the Sasquatch Sasquatch Central, where they sit there and read an account, and I had those guys had read a different account of a military encounter with the Sasquatch where the army fought a band of Bigfoots and they won and whatnot. But, because it was on Sasquatch Central, I felt like that wasn't vetted information.
Mm-hmm.
However, I felt like it really rang true, but I wasn't going to hang my hat on it. And then there was the account, this different account, but in the eyewitness account and Witness of the Unknown Volume 1 and Chapter 33, and I just felt like, okay, well, something like that has happened.
Sure.
And that just makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and those books are those are accounts by the witnesses they sent to me, so it's in their words. I don't do a lot of editing with those because it's not a quote. If you do too many changes, I know people have griped. Not too many. It's been a few people. They some people are really nitpicky about things, about details in writing. But if you alter something too much, it's not a quote anymore. So I give it to people raw.
Oh, I love those. I think it's great, and you really get the flavor of who this person is. You know?
Exactly. That's the whole point, is letting people read for themselves how that person experienced what they did in their own words.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's great. I love those.
You know, as an author, that's my whole creative process is presenting things. I don't write things just because. I present it for a reason. You know, there's a reason behind what I'm trying to get across to the reader.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Anything else, fellas, before we call it quits for the week?
Oh,
No, it was great to have Adam on here
It
tonight.
certainly has been.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it so much. It's just been a real pleasure. It really has.
And Adam, you and I will talk some more whenever you want to chat.
Yeah.
We'll talk, and we have some other things we're working on. So,
Yeah, that sounds great. Look forward to it.
fellas, it's been a pleasure. You know, as always. So, Brian, great talk. We do have some other people lined up already. I just kind of tossed it out there, and you'd be amazed the amount of people that want to come on and chat with us. So, one of the things we are talking about doing, we are going to be doing some format changes, and Brian and I are working on that. I've had people, when I put the shows on YouTube, they gripe that the show's too short. We do an hour show, and they complain it's too short. I'm actually glad to hear that. But one of the changes is we're talking about doing an hour and a half show, and it'll have different segments in it. So we have a small team that's working on development of that. So that's kind of where we're headed. You know, for people listening, you know, you have some things to look forward to. But that's all I'm going to say at the moment, because I'm not really sure what some of the other people who are doing the development are. We know what some of the discussion's been, but nothing's really finalized yet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I tell you, you know, we can't get enough of this information. So, you know, the way I work, I'm working on a computer all day, so I can sit there and I can go through 8 Witness of the Unknown accounts. If they're an hour each, or if they're 2 hours, I'll go through 4. You know,
I have people tell me that they binge listen to my YouTube stuff.
Yeah.
I'm actually very happy. I mean, now the channel is well over 1 million views. I think it's at 1,120,000 plus. Very happy about that. I'm asking people, please subscribe to the channel. Because we're going to be doing, like I said, a lot more. The website's being upgraded and everything right now, so lots of stuff to look forward to.
Very exciting. Very exciting.
And I'm not going to mention what Adam and I are working on, so we'll keep that a secret too. So
Keep the lid on it.
Keep a lid on it, right?
And remember, if anybody has any questions, they can email me at orlandooutsider@yahoo.com.
Absolutely. We want people to send questions in.
Yep.
And I should say, if people are interested in talking with Brian and I, get a hold of Brian and let him know, and we can, we can kind of schedule that in.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, fellas, we'll close for the evening, and thank you both so much for having the chat with me tonight.
Oh,
Yep.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, Brian.
Yep. See you next week.
All right, fellas, have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone, for joining me this week. Be sure to tune in again next week as we explore another account from a witness of the unknown.